All right, folks, here we are. We're back at the podcast on this hill.
It's a beautiful sunny day in Oregon, wherever you're listening to this. The sun is shining. Rare day.
I don't know how many new listeners we get, but if you're new to us, this is a podcast from Church on the Hill. We are one church in Turner and Kaiser. Now, that's kind of funny right there because we don't really talk about being a Turner church very much because
Most people don't know where it is.
Salem is the bigger town that we're right at the edge of.
Yeah,
but our address is Turner, which is a small town.
Yeah.
Which has become kind of popular recently to move to Turner.
Should have bought land there a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like everything else.
Yeah. When did we become not just the church on the hill out here in Turner, but when did Kaiser become Church on the Hill?
Kaiser campus opened in January of 2010. If you don't know where Kaiser is, it's on the north end of our city of Salem, right on the freeway, right off the freeway, I-5 corridor there, and tens of thousands of people pass by there every day, and it's a property we purchased across the street from Kennedy Elementary, and so it's been a really strategic place to be.
Yeah, it was the church building was already there.
Yeah, I'm not sure who put it there, but
January 10th, 2010 was my first Sunday at Church on the Hill, and that was the first Sunday of the Kaiser campus, and you'd invited me to come be a part of that, so I left the church I was at. You know what, I've told you this before, I think, but the pastor when I left, and I sat down with the pastor and said, I love my church. I love you guys. I'm not leaving out of any offense at all. I'm going to help a guy I know, Bruce Stefanik, start another campus, in this location here in Kaiser.
And they warned you about
that.
And
they did. They warned me. They didn't warn me about you because I don't think they knew you from Adam. But they said, Jason, if that's what God's saying, that's great. But I just want to tell you that location is a church graveyard. That's what they told me. And he's a great guy. I love him dearly. He's someone I still have very high regard for. And he wasn't lying. The truth was that location had seen a lot of churches come and go.
Right, yeah.
And not really ever, I think, get traction. And I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'm going to go there and we're going to try to do something and we fail. But the worst thing that could happen is we tried to do something for Jesus.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah. Risks. Life is full of risks.
Life is full of risks. And that risk was well worth taking because we got a thriving campus there now.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure to be out there.
Yeah.
The neighborhood, right in the neighborhood. That's what we were after.
Yeah.
A presence of a Jesus community in a neighborhood where people could walk to. So.
Yeah.
And people do.
That's a big difference between these two campuses. Is that it's not that this campus at Turner doesn't have homes around it, but it's pretty limited.
Yeah.
There's one street.
We're a little bit out.
There's a dozen homes, maybe. Where the Kaiser campus is right in the middle of residential. There are a bunch of apartment buildings right around it.
Yeah.
There's a trailer park directly across the street. There's a school. There's
Little
caddy
League
corner
fields.
from us. There's Little League fields.
Yeah.
So we are really in the middle of a town.
Yeah, it's beautiful to be there. We do an after-school program for the public school across the street, and they literally can just walk across our parking lot and come in and be loved on by our staff and encouraged. So that was part of the dream way back in the day. Yeah,
and we could really use some people that would be willing to step up and serve community because those kids need mentors. They need people to play with them and love on them and spend time with them. As well as on our Sundays. I'm not afraid to give a plug here and say that, this last Sunday we had like 200 kids, which used to be the number that would come on maybe an Easter.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of a regular Sunday occurrence to have that many kids show up. And we're not interested in just keeping our kids occupied while the parents hear the word of God. Like we are ministering to children.
Yeah, it's not childcare.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it might be... they're not in competition with one another. They're just not. But if you could only have one, maybe minister to kids more than adults.
That's your future.
Because those kids need to hear Jesus, and that's the next generation.
Yeah.
So
that's the beauty, though, right? We have our culture here at Church on the Hill is, ministering across the generations. One generation shall tell the next of the wonderful works of the Lord. And so that's something we try to cultivate right now, right? We just last night started a parenting class. We have about 200 adults in the room.
Yeah.
And parents, and some of them are seasoned parents.
Yeah.
They're parents who...
Yep, there's grandparents that are sitting at the table.
Yeah.
There's brand new parents.
Brand new parents, pregnant women. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we have the whole gamut. But the vision of the class is to try to cast passion for being an engaged parent, an aware parent, a godly parent, and multiplying, where you're going to hand it off the faith and hand off what it means to be a follower of Jesus and a good citizen to the next generation.
The way you said that is really valuable, because I left last night, and one of the things, you always kind of debrief in your mind as you're driving home. How did that go?
Yeah.
What would I do different if I was doing it again? And one of the things I thought was, we talked about raising godly children, which is that's what a parenting class, is for and about. But step one is, am I a godly parent?
Yeah.
Because it's sad, but it's not uncommon that people might have the testimony, like, yeah, my parents sent me to church as a kid. Like, that'll be good for you, or they let the bus pick you up. A lot of churches used to have bus ministries that would go around. Were you ever a part of a bus ministry?
I was, in California, Northern Cal. It's a fun time.
Yeah, so you drove around a bus and picked kids up and brought them to church, ministered to them?
Yeah, and a lot of times their parents didn't go or didn't want to go, but they were happy to let their kids go, which is kind of a funny thing. But oftentimes that parent would end up following, because Johnny would come home or Susie would come home and read Bible verses they learned or sing songs they learned, and began to soften the hearts of the parents. One of the things I was thinking of last night is that, chronologically you may be 40, but there may be places in your life emotionally that haven't kept up, with the chronological passing of time. And so you have parents who are 40 who are trying to raise children, but they have unformed areas in their own lives that they still need to be parented in, which isn't a condemnation. It's just a fact of life, right? That that's sometimes the panic we feel, like, I don't know if I'm ready to have children because I haven't figured things out in my own life yet. But unfortunately, life doesn't stop and allow us to oftentimes catch up. It happens along the way.
Yeah. I often think about a show that was really popular for a long time, because they basically took a psychological term and they made it into a show. It's called Arrested Development.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking. What you're describing is, I'm 40, but in this part of my life, I'm an 8th grader.
Yeah.
Right? Because something arrested or stopped my development at the 8th grade. Like I matured to a certain point, and then maybe I didn't have a dad who had ever gone past that point himself. And so I react to some situations like you'd expect an 8th grade boy to react, as opposed to how you'd expect a 40-year-old man to react. Yeah. Or, on the female side, like that, I got stuck in the 6th grade, and something about my parenting or something about school or, something else that happened to me. And in every other place, I might be a high performer on my job. Like I'm succeeding in this one area, but then there's this other area of my life, of relationships, I just can't figure it out. I keep picking the wrong guy, and it's because, well, you've got the taste of a 6-year-old, or a 6th grade girl, and maybe we need some reparenting.
Isn't it interesting here in the church world where we're living and working? We oftentimes see a pattern of people, maybe kids who are raised in church, whose parents brought them faithfully, they were part of a youth group or whatever, and then they get into college, university years, and they disappear. Yeah. And they're who knows where for 4 or 6 years. And then all of a sudden they reappear 7 years later. Now they're married with a little child, and they're saying, they use a phrase that sounds like this: we just need to get back in church. Yeah. And I think what's going on, and we're glad for that, but I think what's going on is they realize now it's not just my life that might be affected, but I actually have a little life that I've been trusted with, that I love to death. Right. And I need to instill some of the things that I value the most. Maybe I've neglected them, but and so in a sense, what I'm describing is growing up, right? They're growing up and realizing, no, this should be a priority, and it hasn't been. So
I think that's the toolbox analogy in a way. Like, there's something about having kids that makes you realize, oh, I don't know if I've got the tools for this. Like I'd collected enough tools to run the life of a 20-something single guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I went to work on time.
I know how to
I
make
paid
good
my
espresso.
bills. Yeah, I know how to make. Yeah, exactly.
The real necessities.
Yeah. I've picked up enough to, you know, I've got insurance. But then you have a kid. You're like, oh, this is more than just getting to work on time or having insurance. Like, I need some help here.
Yeah.
And the last place I remember finding wisdom and finding comfort, finding love, was in the church.
Yeah.
And so they end up kind of swinging back around and saying, I feel like it's time to come back.
Isn't it interesting how we were just having a conversation right before we started this podcast about as we grow older as men, just speaking for us right now in this studio, that we realize the older we got, the more things our fathers were right about that we wouldn't admit they were right about when we were 18 or 19, right? And so here we are as parents and fathers and men who are married realizing, there's a lot I thought I knew, but I really didn't know, but I didn't want to let on, or I rebelled against it, or I was stubborn, or whatever. And there's something about, maybe it's just, again, the passing of time, maybe it's experience, but you begin to realize there's still a lot that I need to know. And passivity is an enemy. Passivity isn't my friend. I have to be proactive about it.
Yeah, in that conversation, I hope it's okay I say this because just us three guys standing around talking up there, you know, a few minutes ago. You said you'd actually written a letter to your dad and asked for forgiveness about some of your stubbornness back then?
Sure, yeah. I was 27 years old, maybe 28, right around there, 27, 28, and I was in a discipleship program, and I don't even know exactly what all was said in the subject matter of that particular week, but the light bulb moment was, I'm not as smart as I thought I was. You know what I mean? I'm not as...
That's the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah, right. It's like those are the levels of learning, right? I didn't even know what I didn't know. But one of the light bulb moments at that time was my dad had a lot of good things to pass on to me, but I was pretty arrogant, stubborn in those teen years. Yeah. And so I actually penned a letter to him, and I'd never written a letter to my own dad in my entire life. And in that letter, I just apologized for not listening and my arrogance and just appreciating everything he had tried to instill in me. Now, I'd been out of the house by that time for 8 years. I was
you were married by then.
Yeah, I was married with a 2-year-old. And his reaction was just shocking. He's like, you know, he was blown away, couldn't believe it.
Did he write back, or just next time he saw you?
Yeah, next time he saw me, next time we talked on the phone, he said, I really appreciated that. And I know it touched him. You know, and I think that's, now that I'm a father, I realize the feedback I get from my sons is super valuable, right? Because, you know, you know what's crazy about parenting? It's different than, say, learning biology where you're dissecting frogs or something.
Right.
We're practicing on human beings.
Yeah, they're living.
Yeah, we're practicing. We're not proficient yet. So we're practicing discipline, and we're practicing communication, and practicing how to love and all this. Yeah. And it's like, man, I'm practicing on people I love right now.
Which is why, you know, part of the reason why we kind of titled this class Parenting on Purpose. Yeah. Because if you're not doing it intentionally with purpose, you tend to just fall back on, well, this is what my dad said.
Right. You do what you've always done.
If you're a parent, you've probably had that experience. You know, your kids get old enough, you hear words come out of your mouth. And you're like, oh my goodness, I sound
that's just my
just
dad
like my dad.
There.
And sometimes you might be like, well, yeah, that is right. You know, he said that, and that's true. But other times it might come out of your mouth. You're like, what am I doing?
Yeah, what's happening right now?
I didn't like that when he said it, and I'm not sure I believe it now. Like I need some more wisdom than I got growing up, and that's not necessarily a fault of our parents, because they were doing the best that they could with what they've been given. You know, that's one of the conversations that happens around the table in a parenting class like that, is you start talking about how you were raised. Because if we're going to talk about how we raise kids, you kind of got to start with, well, how was I raised?
Yeah, what shaped me?
You have to examine it. We do that with every premarital. Like, hey, just so you know, if you don't really think about this, you're just going to take in your mom and dad's marriage, because that's what you've known and seen. Yeah. And maybe they didn't have one, or maybe one of them wasn't there. So you're going to need more than you got to go into this marriage. And the same thing happens with parenting. Like, we better look backwards so that we can look forward and say, oh, maybe my parents did a really good job there. I'd like to emulate them in this area of life. But, you know, there's this other spot, finances or whatever, where they just never really had it figured out. And I just kind of picked that up from them, and I better I better rethink this.
Yeah.
Get a new teacher.
Isn't it crazy, the whole concept of an examined life? There's a great plug for a book we'd make, an author by the name of Pete Scassaro. He's back on the East Coast, pastored for many years, and he wrote a series of books. But the main one was called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Right. And in the book, he really unpacks this whole idea of going back, and not in some morbid self-introspection kind of, but actually going back and looking at your family of origin and what shaped them, and then what shaped me, and being able to sort of sort out, if you will, like what were the things that are great that I want to hold on to and pass on, and what are the things that I just have to recognize were not so great, and I don't want to pass those on. A good example might be anger, right? My parents were angry a lot. My dad was angry a lot, or whatever the case may be, or quiet. They were super quiet. We didn't talk much in the home. No one ever asked for forgiveness. Well, those are the kind of things, even though you may have been raised in those things, that was part of your upbringing. It doesn't have to be part of your future. It doesn't have to be part of your parenting. But unless you recognize it, and not just chalk it up to genetics or something.
Right. Yeah, you said not just, morbidly going back and digging, sifting through old bones, but going back with a purpose, holding Jesus' hand, and saying, "Can you help me understand this? Like, what was going on back here?"
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, I know there was I think a time in psychology, I think they've grown past this, but where a patient would come in with horrible guilt. They'd feel terrible about their life because they'd messed up their life. And again, I don't blame modern psychology for this, but I think there was a time in the past where they would then just dig into their past and say, well, it's your mom. Look at what your mom did. She held you too long, or she did this and that. And so really you're like this because of them doing this. And people would walk out angry at their parents and mad at them because they didn't have the tools of forgiveness. And redemption and resurrection, even those old broken things can now be a part of a beautiful story, a testimony, what we call it, a beautiful story of God's redemption in my life and transformation. And that's where the gospel, I think, is always going to win over. Now, there's room for modern psychology for sure, and I think it has improved from where it was. There's definitely room, for biblical counseling, absolutely, because that's the process of let's be intentional. Like when God saves us, sometimes He saves me, and my mind is saved too, but I haven't thought it through. The implications of my salvation. When I think good biblical counseling can help you see these are the implications of His redemption. This is then how I should be living in light of the resurrection, how I should view my past, my mom and dad, my history in view of the redemption story that God has in my life.
Yeah, that's where that saying, I think, comes into play, where forgiveness is giving up any hope of a better past. It's not that we ignore our past or hide it in a closet and never go near it, but it no longer defines me. And I think that's the key there. My past no longer defines me into my future. Now, I can look back and it becomes a reference point. I can look back and say, anybody who's come out of addictions or come into a recovery program could relate to what I'm saying, right? They can look back and point to, and back there, things were a mess, but look at where I am now. So that's a reference point. I never want to go back there. There were things I could have learned, I did learn, but I'm living my life facing forward. I can't wait for my past to change because it's not going to change. That's the saying, right? It's not going to get any better or any worse. It is what it is. But facing forward, I'm going to forge a new path with new information, new understanding, new grace, new maturity.
Sometimes
new tools.
When talking to someone who's in a tough place, maybe they're in that place of divorce, or they've got a kid that they're really, really struggling with. They've picked a path and they don't know what to do, how to raise this kid. One of the tools I like to use personally, and I think it often helps other people, is I'll tell them, imagine looking at this not in front of you, because right now this is a problem that's right in front of you. But what if you could imagine it in the rearview mirror? It's behind you. Because one day, what we're talking about right now, is going to be a story you tell.
Right.
It's going to be like 10 years from now. It's going to be a story. 20 years from now, it's going to be a story that you tell. 20 years from now, how would you like to tell people you handled this?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people, my marriage got really rough, there's infidelity, or I gave up. I walked away.
Yeah.
And I looked for comfort. And is that the story you want to tell?
Because in a way, you're in control of the story.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Or would you rather tell at 20 years from now, holding your wife's hand, God did a miracle here? Because that's a choice you can make. But right now, it's a hard choice.
Yeah.
Because you can't imagine the future. But if you do the hard thing right now, that will be your story. But if you do the easier thing right now, well, that's going to be a different story than you're going to tell.
That's that thing you're describing there is living with vision, right? Futuristic living.
Yeah.
I want to be self-aware in the present. Self-aware being I have a pretty good idea of how I got here, what got me here, good and bad, and I have a good idea of what I want to do. But I'm going to make these choices and decisions.
Yeah.
That help me write a better story, a futuristic story. That passage that's really well quoted, probably most of the time out of context. But this is what God spoke to the Israelites in the darker days of their existence. Right? I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for evil, plans to give you a future and a hope. Well, what was God? He was speaking to some people that were in a mess.
Yeah.
And not just a day mess, but they were in a decades mess of idolatry and abandonment and so forth. And God said, "No, I want to speak. I want to speak vision into your future,
about the future."
Yeah,
and I imagine him like rolling out. Both of us have spent time looking at plans before, like building plans. Almost rolling out a set of plans and saying, like, "I have the plans in front of me. I know where this is going. With your cooperation, this is going to be good." Now, if you choose to ignore the plan, if you choose to go a different direction. And in parenting, I think, just go back to that. There's hard choices constantly and hard things to do. But if you make the hard choices, it makes for an easier life. If you take the easy choices, it makes for a hard life.
Yeah.
And an example would be, we talked in the parenting class about how we're wanting to transfer some of my responsibilities to a child. And I'm constantly looking at every age and stage. What am I doing for you that you should start doing for yourself?
Yeah.
Because when they're little, you do everything because they don't have any self-control. They don't have anything, so you do it. But at a certain point, when you're picking up, Johnny's toys and he's 8 years old, you're like, well, wait a minute. Why am I doing this? This should be for him. But the truth is, it's usually easier to pick up Johnny's toys than to get him to pick up his toys.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're choosing a harder life if you choose to do that.
Pick your pain.
Pick your pain, exactly.
Yeah.
Because there's one pain in picking up toys. There's another pain in trying to train a little kid to pick up toys. Yeah. It'll get harder before it gets easier. And that's a simple little, example, just picking up toys. But it is true that every age and stage, there's a new thing that goes, oh man, it's going to be tough to train you through this. It's going to be hard work. And in some ways, I'd rather just do it myself. Yeah. But then I've raised a kid who his development has been arrested. It's stuck back here, and I'm the one who got him stuck. Yeah, because I didn't give him the tools to lead an adult life.
Yeah, we use a movie clip oftentimes, don't we, in our marriage classes? Out of that older movie now, The Incredibles, that animated movie, and where whoever wrote that had some real insight into human nature. But there's a scene where the kids are around the dining room table and they're screaming and yelling and pulling each other's hair and killing each other. And Bob, the husband, is in the kitchen reading a newspaper and dreaming about being a superhero and dreaming about being anything but just a dad in a home.
Doing
the mundane things of trying to get your children to eat dinner and stop fighting. And the mom yells from the dining room. She's trying to bring order and protect the people she loves the most. Bob, it's time to engage. I'll never forget seeing that movie the first time and almost crying because I thought those are the words of, in a sense, those are the words of a loving heavenly Father to us, right? That's what he was saying to Israel. Israel, it's time to engage. Not just engage with the plans you have made, with I have plans. I have a way this works. I have tools I'll put in your bag. I have a future for you, but you have to engage with me. It's time to engage.
And I hope people have seen that clip because in that moment he does engage, but like in the class we talked about the difference between just authoritarian heavy leadership versus relational leadership, and he went authoritarian heavy.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's a big strong man.
Guy,
He lifts up the table and yells at the kids and and there's that, okay, props, you engaged, but what did the kids learn from this? Yeah. What was the takeaway that they had? And the takeaway was, well, man, Dad can get really mad if we're not careful. Right. We better toe the line, as opposed to Dad loves us, doesn't want us hurting one another. He stepped in and brought a loving hand to us.
Wow, I was just thinking where you're talking about who's listening to this right now, wherever you are, and you might stop for a second and just reflect. Like, did I have a father who was truly engaged with me, who I felt like he listened, we had good conversations, I lived. I didn't live in a performance-based environment or a judgmental environment. I was allowed to make mistakes, but I was unconditionally loved. That kind of existence, which is, I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's, I think, or the other side of the coin where I sort of raised myself. My dad was non-existent. Maybe he was in the home, but he wasn't engaged. Or maybe he literally wasn't in the home. Those are some of the testimonies we heard last night. My father wasn't in the home. Or if he was emotionally absent, right? And then right now you reflect that, but God promises to be an engaged, present, wise, loving, heavenly Father. And that's the power, I think, of the gospel. Because if the gospel is not true, that Jesus Christ opened the way to a relationship with the Father, well, then I'm still on my own. I'm still adrift. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to perform in order to be loved or accepted. And it's just, what a tragic thing to imagine. But we don't have to be alone, and we don't have to perform anymore. We've been accepted.
If someone is there in that place like you just described, that maybe it makes them realize, like, oh, Dad or Mom or both, like, what is step one, you think? In like, okay, now I realized that there's a certain dawning on me, like, oh, maybe there's more back there. There's more dysfunction that plays into my decisions today than I thought. What do I do now? Now I know it, or I recognize it. Now what?
Yeah. I think one of the challenges of our culture today is isolation. The internet has enabled us to some degree to just remain isolated. I can just get my information, get my social interaction. I don't actually have to relate to another human being, and I just think it's tragic. That's the beauty of why I think of church. This is why we pastor, why I believe in the power of Christian community, because you can come regardless of your background and hopefully find an environment where you're accepted and you begin to know and you're known. So I think that first step is moving towards another human being that has maybe what you need in your moment, your season. So in the case of a man who's been sort of raised himself, I think there's something incredibly powerful about moving towards a group of men where you can know and be known, and you can open your life up. And it doesn't mean they're perfect or you're perfect, but what it means is, hey, we're in this journey together, and you discover that you're not as alone as you think you were, and you're not as oftentimes your story is not unique. It's shared by a whole bunch of other men that say, along with you, they say to you, they look you in the eye and they say, you know what? Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Man, did you blow it back there? 15 years? Man, me too. You struggle with addiction? You know what? Me too. You're insecure about whether you're doing a good job or not. It's amazing. Over the course of our ministry, I've known men who are incredibly successful, multi-millionaires, and men who just lived a relatively average life. But everybody struggles with, gosh, should I be more? Am I enough?
Yeah.
Is this enough?
Yep.
Have I done enough?
Yeah.
Me too.
I remember my dad. He passed from cancer a few years ago, and I never lived that close to him during his cancer struggle. But whenever I did go to see him, we'd end up in waiting rooms together because. That's what happens when you have a terminal disease like that. Yeah. You end up seeing the doctor a lot. And the cancer had taken his kidneys, and so he was on dialysis, which means like 2-3 times a week. You're sitting down attached to a machine. Back then, I think it's gotten a little better. You were there for several hours. And a lot of times I was just sitting around with him, while he was doing his treatments and stuff. And I picked up a magazine, a men's magazine. I can't remember if it was like a Men's Health or a GQ, but one of those like guys magazines. It's all for men. Everything in it is guys stuff. And I won't say the actor was, but there was just an article on an actor, and I didn't really care about the actor, but I'm just killing time because I'm there with my dad, and I start reading it. And this actor, though, he was like, the epitome of a man's man. He was if you want, to represent strength and masculinity, you got this actor to play the role, and he was going to, kick butt and take names.
Yeah.
And he said, it feels like my whole life, from the time I was about 13, I just kept waiting for someone to walk in the door and tell me I was a man. And just tell me I was enough. And I thought, oh my goodness, if this is what we're putting in front of, our young men and saying, yeah, be like this guy. Yeah. Like when trouble comes, be like that. That's the answer. And he has no idea what it means.
Yeah.
To be a man. And he was describing fatherlessness in his own life. He said, and I never had a dad around. And so no one was there to say, good job, son. Like, hey, you're a man now. And so I've just never been able to answer that question. And that is at the root of why I act so manly, because it is an act. Because I'm trying to figure out, like, is this enough? Am I man enough now? And I know we're just talking about men here, but I think it's worth doing because there's a role that a father plays in a house. And if you're playing that role from insecurity, it's probably going to hurt the kids in the long run.
And it's such a vulnerable spot, or a vulnerable way to go through life, because my whole life is really either consciously or unconsciously a search for validation, right? Like I want someone to tell me I'm a man. Well, what if that someone who wants to say those words to you has ulterior motives?
Yeah.
What if they want to sell you something? What if they want to control you? Which
Absolutely.
That's why that guy is on the front page of a men's magazine, right?
Right.
But on the ground, in the trenches with men, that's a question, again, I think we're all asking. Am I enough? Can I cut it? And how much is enough? Yeah. Well, if that answer is going to come from an equally lost world, we're just the blind are leading the blind. But what if that answer comes from a heavenly Father?
Yeah, and I think in parenting, part of becoming a godly parent is to say, I know I'm not enough.
Yeah,
my kid needs something that I can't give them. Because my kid is born just like I was, a sinner in need of a Savior. Yeah. And I can be their dad, I could be their mom, and I could be the best one I could possibly be, and they're still going to need a Savior. Yeah. They're still going to need redemption. Yeah. They're still going to need forgiveness. I can represent that as well as I possibly can, and I'm still not going to be enough, and that's okay. Because the reality is then, now the best thing I could do as a parent is point them to the one who is enough, the one who's done enough, who can give the final verdict in their life and name them. And I that's one of the things that still amazes me just about parenting. I know it's so simplistic, I feel like maybe we miss it sometimes. But God allows us to name a child.
Yeah.
And then he calls that kid by their name. That name that I named my girls Grace and Faith. And when God talks to them, he says Grace. He says their name, the name that I gave them. That's going to hang around for eternity. That's a pretty big deal. Right. And that's just a name. What else am I giving my kid? I'm giving them, I'm trying to form an identity in them. I'm trying to form character in them. I'm trying to, all of these things. And I can give them the right name, but then after that, I feel like, God, I'm not enough. I don't have, I care more about these girls than I've ever cared about anything in my whole life. I need you to save them. I need you to direct them. And now I'm in that place in my life where they are leaving the house, and I realize they're out of my, I'm still in their life. Yeah. I'll be in their life for the rest of my life, but they're making decisions for themselves
Some
now.
of those strings are being cut.
Yeah, and they're coming back to dad and saying, what do you think about this or that? But ultimately, it's their call, not mine. And I'm trying my best, but I need to equip them with Jesus because he's going to leave the house with them, and I'm going to stay here.
Yeah. In the gospel, what we see is an invitation to partner with God. in everything, in redeeming the earth, in bringing love and grace into a dark culture or a hurting world, and in parenting, it's creating, or it's cooperating with the God who created our children. It's trying to figure out who God has wired them and shaped them to be.
Yeah.
And then what I do is I cooperate with God. It's not the other way around, because if it's the other way around, it's all on me. It's not like getting God to come to bless my plan. It's God, what is your plan for these lives that you've put into our home? And I want to cooperate. I want to discover what that is. And again, that passivity is an enemy of that. But when we're on that journey together with God and with other people, it's a great learning experience.
A journey. It's a journey.
Yeah.
I think we've been going for a while, but maybe we could ask this question real quick and try to give an answer. I hope I don't know. Have we gone too long? Ethan, you can tell us if we need to wrap it up.
When you start hearing kids, I'd say that's too long.
Okay.
All right. We're we got classroom next door, so they'll let us know when we've gone too long, because they'll start singing. It's a music class. All right. There's a question here. It's actually from a little while back, and I'm going to leave part of it out because maybe it's a personal. But they're talking about praying for someone that was very, very close to the family who passed away. And it says, many people, including myself, were praying for this, for his health and healing. Since he passed, it made me wonder why we pray to God for things and people when in the grand scheme of things, the path is already cut out and God's will be done anyway. That's the question. So they're really asking, like, hey, I pray, and in this particular instance, I prayed for someone to be healed, and they weren't healed, and it kind of made me think, why do we pray? If at the end of that you're told, well, it was God's will that they pass, well, then why was I praying at the same time?
The phrase that stands out to me in that question is in the grand scheme of things. The fact is, I don't know the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Now, does God? I believe he does, but I live in the moment, and I live in this particular day, in this particular circumstance. And so prayer is there's a bit, obviously, there's an element of mystery to prayer. But what if prayer does something that maybe I don't understand? In other words, if my friend is sick and I'm just praying for their healing, I think that might be a little bit, might be short-sighted in the grand scheme of things, because prayer could do more than just, God's able to, again, handle, he's able to multitask in a way that we're not. So what if prayer is not just changing, prayer to change them, but what if prayer is an element to change me? What if prayer changes my perspective? What if prayer changes something that it tips over a domino that I don't see, but or maybe I do somewhere down the road. But I think there's a little bit of there's going to be some faith and mystery always involved in prayer, and the option to just not pray, I think, is a depressing and a really ineffective option.
Yeah, that's very true. To choose not to talk to God about the things that matter to you. And,
I don't know how that can't be depressing.
And also, we are a church who believes that prayer changes things.
Sure.
That it's what we believe.
Yeah.
You know, we're not, there's an extreme side of Calvinism. I'm not here to rail on Calvinism, but there's an extreme side of Calvinism that honestly most people don't take, that says, like, yeah, God is completely in control of everything. Every decision is already made, and you're just kind of a puppet walking that out. And, you know, I think the reality is nobody really behaves in their life that way. We all act in every decision as if it matters.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's an act. I think it's reality. I think our decisions, our prayers, our thoughts, all of these things really matter, and they have real significance. And I know that because God asks me to pray. When you pray, pray like this.
Yeah.
And he's not into me doing futile things. He doesn't want me to waste my time.
Yeah.
So if it was a waste of time and he said, I've got all this under control, you don't really need to do this. He does say, don't pray like the pagans pray, just vain repetition.
Babbling,
Please don't do that, because that doesn't do anything. If you think your volume or the length or the fervency, you know, some of those things that I think sometimes we think is what pushes the dial isn't what actually pushes the dial.
Yeah.
So I just want you to pray in faith believing.
There's that old saying, there's no unbelievers in a foxhole, right? And when we're faced with tragedy or death, prayer then is not just some rote repetition of words, but it's this conversation with God.
Yeah.
And God can take it all. If that conversation is hard or angry or complaining, or the book of Psalms is a book of prayers put into black and white, right?
Yeah.
And some of those prayers are desperate prayers. Some of those prayers are joyful thanksgiving. Some of those prayers are like, God, what is going on here?
Why did you do this? Yeah.
In fact, most of the Psalms are those prayers of lament. Like, God, this is awful. Life is awful. The wicked seem to be winning. Pain seems to be omnipresent. Where are you, God? Where are you? And
I'm a big fan of the blues. I love the blues.
Yeah.
I love old blues. And one of the things I love about it is it's real.
Yeah.
Like someone says, this hurts, this is terrible, I hate this. And that's what happens in the Psalms. And sometimes you just have to pour your heart out to God. And he says, I want you to pour your heart out. And I think that doesn't negate the sovereignty of God. It is the sovereignty of God. Within his sovereignty, he says, I want you to pray. This is my will. This is my sovereign will that you ask, that you talk to me, and I'm going to talk back to you. And it's not a play that's been written out. It's a real interaction. So whatever you think about predestination and sovereignty has to take into account that the God of the Bible asks us to do these things. And so you can't have it so written in stone, even though I do believe, yes, God knows the beginning from the end. He knows everything. I don't take away from any of the omnis of God. He is all of those things.
Sure.
But he also asks us to interact with him, which means something. And like you say, I've seen miracles.
Yeah.
I've seen people that came in one way and left another.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a spiritual miracle. They were an addict and God saved them and changed their life. Or they were sick and infirm in some ways and God healed them. And I just can't.
Isn't it interesting? Because what I said earlier was prayer can change me, and maybe I don't even care about that yet. I just want you to heal my friend,
right?
But all of us, that's why I'm saying God's able to go, well, I'll deal with your friend. I love your friend, or I love your loved one more than you do, but I want to deal with you now. So the idea of the blues, a band that writes these words and these words that are put to music of lament, or they're the blues.
Yeah.
And think you had this picture. I was just last Saturday at a live music event of a band in a crowd of people sharing a meal, and they were playing, what would be oldies, right? The cover songs of all these bands from the 80s and the 90s. But even though it was a room full of strangers, everybody was engaged, tapping their foot, smiling, laughing, singing. Some were dancing. And so it was those words and that music brought these people together. I think that's what church is like, right? Yeah. Church is we come together, and maybe on a Sunday we sing the blues.
Yep.
It's like, man, this is a tough thing. We lost George Jackson last week. We lost Brother Jim last week. He went on. He died.
Yeah.
And then some Sundays we gather and the songs are joyful. We celebrate together, but we're doing it. Life together, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, together. That's good. Yeah, I hope, again, this question was a little bit old. It came a few months ago. There's more questions than we can ever get to. But I hope when the family goes through moments like this, I'm going to pray that I come out of it more engaged with God, not less. Because there have been times, we could also talk about, there's always times my prayers go unanswered.
Yeah, they seem to be going
They seem to go, like, they don't go, I don't believe any prayer goes unheard.
Right.
But there are times they feel unanswered. Well, this is what I was asking for, and it didn't come about.
Yeah.
But I think that's partially because we just have limited perspective. We just can't see it.
We don't see the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, there is going to be a day when I can stand before God and all those questions will feel like, oh, I think I'm beginning to see it now. It was your goodness that you were doing. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel wise. It didn't feel just. But now I see what you were doing because he's good.
Yeah.
And so in the end, he will be proven good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm grateful God hasn't given me everything I've ever prayed for.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. That's a great old country song. You know it? I thank God for unanswered prayers.
Oh, yeah. No,
it's a great song. Yeah. I like the blues, but I like country too.
There you go.
Nothing wrong with little George Jones. Okay, folks. Wow. Well, thank you. Time is up. Yeah. Thanks a lot for hanging out with us here. If you've got a question that you'd like us to address, I almost feel a little bit bad because we ask for questions, and I know we can't address all the questions that come, but please ask them, and we'll do the best we can. We would love to have your questions.
Yeah. If you're listening from far away, maybe a few states over, or maybe you're outside this country on the other side of the world. I know there's some of you that listen to us. Wherever you are, bless you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wherever you are,
and
God's there.
if you're local and you'd like to join us, please come on a Sunday. Our parenting class is full. Man, it's so full. There's so many people there, so many kids there.
Yep.
The other night, it's amazing. But we'd love to have you on a Sunday. Join a life group, be a part of our community.
Yep.
Bless you guys. Love you. See you soon.
Have a great week.